David Turner was not a man who could be easily overlooked. At 78 years old, he had spent a lifetime cultivating an empire of wealth, influence, and success. A self-made billionaire, David had founded and built Turner Enterprises from the ground up, a vast conglomerate with holdings in everything from tech startups to luxury real estate. His name was known in every corner of the business world, his face often gracing the covers of magazines as the epitome of American success. David's mansion, perched high in the hills of an exclusive enclave in Kentucky, was nothing short of a palace. It was an architectural masterpiece, surrounded by sprawling gardens, private lakes, and a staff that attended to his every need. His family, though distant and largely disconnected from the hustle of his daily life, consisted of his only son, Robert, who was now in his mid-50s, and his daughter, Emily, in her early 40s. Both had long since moved away to pursue their own lives, their visits to their father's home infrequent and polite. David's relationship with them had always been strained. His devotion to work often came at the cost of his family. On this particular afternoon, David found himself behind the wheel of one of his prized possessions, a silver Bentley Continental GT, a symbol of his achievements. The car was the epitome of luxury, sleek, powerful, and elegant, with the finest leather upholstery and the latest in cutting-edge technology. David had always loved the way the engine purred beneath him, a constant reminder of the control and comfort that wealth had afforded him. The journey he was on today, however, was different from his usual routine. He had decided to take a break from the hustle of corporate meetings, his phone buzzing constantly with messages from board members and partners. He needed time to think, so he decided to drive an old habit from when he was younger, when he would take long drives in the countryside to clear his head. But today the Kentucky countryside felt vastly different. The winding roads, once picturesque and peaceful, now seemed endless, stretching far into the horizon. The occasional patch of farmland and the quiet isolation of the area made David feel more isolated than ever. He could have been anywhere in the world on his private jet or in one of his corporate offices, but instead, here he was, driving down a dusty rural road that was far from the life of luxury he'd become accustomed to. David's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a sudden thud. The car jolted to a stop, and he immediately knew something was wrong. He shifted the car into park and stepped out, looking at the rear tire. It was flat. Not just low on air, completely flat. "Great," David muttered to himself, adjusting his crisp suit jacket. The Bentley was supposed to be the height of perfection. Yet here he was alone on an empty road, far from any town, stranded in the middle of nowhere. His wealth had always kept him at arm's length from such inconveniences. He had always had people for this. Mechanics, drivers, assistants. There was always someone to take care of these things. But here, in this moment, his money meant nothing. The Kentucky heat bore down on him as he stood there, feeling the weight of his age in his legs and back. It had been years since he had so much as lifted a wrench, and even longer since he had felt this helpless. The thought of calling for a tow truck entered his mind, but as he reached for his phone, he realized there was no signal. Frustration bubbled within him. "Of course," he muttered bitterly, glancing around the deserted stretch of road. Not a soul in sight. No service. No way to call for help. He briefly wondered if he should have taken the helicopter instead, but that would have meant going back to the mansion and dealing with the press, or worse, another meeting. He needed space, yet here he was, trapped by something as mundane as a flat tire. David walked around the car and glanced back down the road, searching for any sign of life. He'd passed a few farms on the way, but it had been a while since he'd seen any signs of civilization. With no other choice, he decided to check the tire himself. Kneeling beside the car, he tried to remember how to change it. His hands, once strong and confident, now felt stiff and awkward as he worked with the jack. He grimaced at the effort it took to unscrew the lug nuts, his fingers aching with each twist. The task, which should have been simple, now felt monumental, and for the first time in years, David felt something he had never truly experienced before: helplessness. As he struggled, a sound broke through the quiet heat of the afternoon. It was the soft crunch of gravel underfoot. David looked up, squinting through the sun's glare. A figure was walking toward him along the side of the road, a young boy, maybe 13 or 14, carrying a small toolbox. David stood, wiping the sweat from his brow. The boy didn't seem to be in a hurry, but he approached with a calm and steady gait. There was something unhurried about the way he moved, something that contrasted sharply with the frantic energy David had been feeling. The boy's name was Luke. Luke had seen David's car from the distance. He wasn't in any rush, but he was used to helping people when they needed it, even if it meant walking several miles just to reach them. It was the way his mother had raised him to always lend a hand, no matter the situation. When he arrived, David was clearly struggling. The man, though well-dressed and polished, was bent awkwardly over the tire. His frustration was evident. Luke hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should offer his help, but then he saw the older man's defeat. There was something about him, perhaps it was the fact that David, despite his wealth, looked like he had no idea what he was doing. "You need a hand?" Luke asked, his voice steady despite his youth. David looked up, momentarily startled by the boy's sudden appearance. He hadn't noticed him approaching. Yes, I do," David replied, the edge of irritation still evident in his voice. "Flat tire. But I can't seem to..." He stopped himself, swallowing his pride. "Do you know how to fix this?" Luke didn't respond with words. Instead, he simply nodded, his face calm and matter-of-fact. Without a word, he set down his toolbox and got to work, his movements practiced and efficient. David watched, both amazed and somewhat embarrassed. Luke worked swiftly, the way someone would if they'd done this 100 times before. The older man tried to offer help, but Luke politely declined. "I've got it," he said, focused entirely on the tire. Within minutes, the wheel was replaced, and Luke stood up, dusting off his hands. David stood there, silently impressed. The boy, though barely more than a child, had done what David couldn't. It was a humbling experience, one that left David with a curious sense of discomfort. He had always been the one offering help, the one in control. Yet here he was, standing on the side of the road, helpless, while a young boy had quietly taken charge. "Well, thank you," David said, his voice softer now, tinged with genuine appreciation. I don't know what to say." Luke shrugged, as if it were no big deal. "No problem, sir. Just happy to help." David, for a moment, wondered if the boy's simplicity was somehow more fulfilling than all the wealth he had amassed over the years. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $100 bill, offering it to Luke. "Take it. It's the least I can do." Luke looked at the bill, then shook his head, refusing. "I don't need it, sir. I just wanted to help." David, still standing there with the bill in his hand, felt a strange discomfort at the boy's refusal. In all his years, he had never encountered such selflessness. People always wanted something: money, favors, recognition. But Luke didn't. He was simply happy to help. David watched him walk away, his mind racing. There was something about this boy, something that made David feel both uneasy and deeply moved. He couldn't shake the feeling that this brief encounter had meant more than it appeared. Days later, David couldn't stop thinking about the boy. Luke's quiet confidence, his refusal of money, the way he had seemed so sure of himself, it all weighed heavily on David's mind. He had lived his life surrounded by people who expected something in return, but Luke had offered help without hesitation or desire for compensation. It was a rarity in a world driven by self-interest. Determined to learn more about the boy, David drove back to the small town of Harland, where he had seen the boy walking from. The town was tucked away, isolated from the bustling cities where David's business empire thrived. It was a world completely different from the one David was used to, a place where life moved slowly, and people still believed in the simple values of kindness and neighborliness. David arrived at a modest home on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much by his standards, small, with a worn porch and a rusty roof, but it was home. Luke's mother, Sarah, greeted him at the door, a hard-working woman in her mid-40s with tired eyes but a kind smile. David introduced himself, explaining his encounter with Luke. Sarah listened patiently, then nodded as if she understood. "Luke's always been like that," Sarah said with a soft chuckle. "He's got a big heart. He helps everyone, no matter who they are. Doesn't ask for anything in return. He believes it's just the right thing to do." David was moved by her words, and for the first time he began to understand the depth of what had happened on that lonely stretch of road. Luke's actions weren't about generosity in the traditional sense, they were about something much deeper. It was a purity of spirit that David had long since lost in his own pursuit of wealth. And that's when David made a decision. David couldn't shake the feeling that Luke had changed something inside of him, something that he hadn't even realized was missing until now. He drove back to his mansion, but the luxury of his life seemed hollow in comparison to the simplicity and kindness of what he had witnessed in that small town. Luke's refusal of money, his unassuming confidence, and the way he helped without expecting anything in return, it all gnawed at David, questioning the true value of wealth. The next day, David made a phone call. He instructed his personal assistant to hire a team of contractors, architects, and workers. He was going to do something about it. He wasn't sure exactly what, but he knew he had to act. The renovations began quietly, almost unnoticed at first. David didn't tell Luke, nor did he mention it to anyone in Harland. His decision was personal, and he wanted it to remain that way. His plan was simple. He would renovate Luke's home. He would replace the worn roof, fix the creaky porch, and make sure that the place was something Luke and his family could be proud of. It wasn't about grand gestures or public recognition. It was about something far more intimate and profound. He wanted to give them a new chance, just as Luke had unknowingly given him a new perspective. Luke's family was humble, and they lived modestly. Sarah worked long hours at a local diner, trying to make ends meet, while Luke attended school and helped his mother with chores around the house. David watched from a distance as the renovations slowly took shape, the house transforming before his eyes. Every day he visited, observing the progress of the workers, checking on the progress of the roof being replaced, the fresh coat of paint on the walls, and the new porch being built. It wasn't easy for David to adjust to the pace of the work. His life had always been about quick decisions, immediate results, and moving from one project to the next. But here, in this small town, the work moved slowly, deliberately. And the more David immersed himself in the project, the more he began to appreciate the value of taking his time, of being present, and of working towards something that would have lasting meaning. One afternoon, as David stood with the contractor, he noticed Luke in the yard watching the workers. His curiosity was palpable, his eyes wide with interest as he observed the men measuring and cutting wood, mixing cement, and laying down the new foundation for the porch. Luke had never shown much interest in the construction business, but David could see a spark in the boy's eyes. The next day, as David arrived on site, he saw Luke again, this time holding a wrench and asking the workers questions. The workers, as if sensing the boy's genuine interest, took him under their wing, showing him how to use the tools and explaining the processes in simple terms. David stood back and watched the scene unfold. He had never considered that the act of helping others could lead to such a ripple effect. He had seen it before in his own life, the way an act of kindness could inspire someone to reach for something greater. But watching Luke interact with the workers, learning how to build, how to construct something tangible with his own hands, it hit David harder than any board meeting ever had. By the end of the week, Luke had taken an interest in the work. He was no longer just a curious onlooker. He was actively participating, eager to learn more. The boy had an aptitude for the craft, and David began to see something he hadn't considered before. Luke had the potential to become something far greater than the life he was living now. He could become an engineer, a builder, someone who could design and construct the world around him. David was moved by the idea, realizing that his initial act of giving was now leading to something far more significant than just a renovated house. One afternoon, David decided to speak to Luke directly. he found him sitting on the edge of the porch, his hands dirty from helping with the project. "Luke," David said, sitting down beside him, "you've got a real gift for this." Luke looked up, a little surprised but grateful for the compliment. "You think so?" David nodded, his eyes scanning the porch as if he saw something more than just wood and nails. "You've got a good eye. You know how things work. You could do something great with this. You ever thought about becoming an engineer, a designer? You could build the kind of things that last." Luke's face lit up with excitement, his eyes widening at the suggestion. "You really think I could do that?" David smiled, a genuine smile, one that was rare for him these days. "I know you could. If that's what you want, I can help you get there. You've already got the heart, the integrity. You just need the skills to back it up. Let me help." Luke hesitated for a moment, his gaze falling to the ground. He seemed overwhelmed by the offer. "I don't know, my family doesn't have much money for school." David placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, his tone sincere. "That's why I want to help. I can make sure you get the education you need. I'll sponsor your studies, send you to college if that's what it takes. But you've got to promise me one thing." "What's that?" David looked him in the eye. "You've got to promise me you'll always help others the way you helped me. Never lose that, Luke. It's rare." Luke's face broke into a wide smile. "I promise." David felt a warmth in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. A sense of fulfillment, of purpose. He wasn't just fixing a house anymore. He was fixing something inside himself. And by helping Luke, he was helping to build a future not just for the boy but for himself as well. As the renovations to Luke's home neared completion, David found himself visiting the project more frequently. He was no longer just an observer, he was part of the process, engaged with the workers and, most importantly, with Luke. Their bond deepened as they shared more moments together, whether it was over lunch, discussing construction techniques, or just talking about life. David began to reflect on how far he had come in his understanding of what truly mattered. He had spent his entire life focused on wealth, on building an empire, on accumulating power. But in the end, it wasn't the buildings or the cars or the money that defined him. It was the relationships, the connections he had with others. Luke had shown him that. When the work was finally completed, the house stood as a testament to what they had built together. It was no longer just a house, it was a symbol of what kindness, selflessness, and genuine connection could create. The new roof, the sturdy porch, and the fresh coat of paint were all signs of transformation, not just for Luke's family, but for David as well. On the day the project was finished, David stood outside the house, looking at the completed work with pride. Sarah, Luke, and the workers gathered around, all of them smiling. Luke stood beside David, a little taller now, his eyes bright with hope and ambition. "This is your home now," David said, his voice filled with emotion. "And if you ever need anything, school, guidance, support, I'm here." Luke grinned. "Thank you, Mr. Turner. I don't know how to repay you." David shook his head, his smile wide. "You already have. You've taught me something I've forgotten, the value of giving without expecting anything in return." As the sun began to set over the small town of Harland, David realized that this simple act of kindness, this decision to help a boy in need, had transformed him more than any business deal ever could. In helping Luke, David had rediscovered a purpose, one far greater than anything he could have imagined in the world of wealth and power. And as he stood there, surrounded by the simple beauty of the moment, David Turner knew that his life would never be the same again. As the weeks passed, David stayed in touch with Luke. He made sure the boy received the education he deserved, and soon Luke was enrolled in a college engineering program, studying with the same curiosity and passion he had shown on the construction site. David, too, continued to change. He found that his desire for wealth was no longer all-consuming. He shifted his focus from expanding his empire to supporting those who could truly benefit from his resources, people like Luke, who showed him that the best investments weren't in companies or stocks, but in people. David's family noticed the change in him as well. His relationship with Robert and Emily began to improve as he opened up more, sharing his newfound perspective on life. He even began to spend more time with them, appreciating the simple moments he had once overlooked. And though his empire of wealth remained, it no longer defined him. What defined him now was the legacy of kindness, the ripple effect of giving without expectation, and the bond he had built with a young boy who had taught him the true meaning of fulfillment. In the end, David learned that life wasn't about what you accumulated, it was about what you gave, how you loved, and how you made a difference in the lives of others. And as he looked back on the journey that had started with a flat tire on a dusty road, David Turner knew that he had found something far more valuable than wealth. He had found the true meaning of life.